biblical tales. God floods the earth, sparing Noah, his family, and 2 of every animal on board his ark.
We now know that at that time, between 12,800 and 11,600 years ago, truly global cataclysmic events involving rapid rises in sea level.
Now, an international team of researchers have found new evidence that a famous formation in Turkey could be the site of the ancient vessels.
There is a site in eastern Turkey that governments have sealed off. Researchers who worked there were told never to speak about what they found. But the data got out. A hollow structure, organized walls, proportions that matched an ancient text written thousands of years ago.
Book of Genesis says Noah landed here in the mountains of Ararat. So, could this really be Noah's Ark?
Word for word. And something behind a sealed door that was still active. Not decayed, not dormant, active. The team that discovered it didn't release a press statement. They were removed from the site without explanation. This is what they found inside. In the eastern region of Turkey.
Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more awe-inspiring stories of faith, survival, and miracles.
Near the base of a rugged mountain range, there is a formation called Durupanar. From the ground, it looks like nothing, just a long raised slope covered in dry soil. But from above, the shape changes everything. The outline is unmistakable. A hull, a vessel, something that doesn't belong on a mountainside at over 6,000 feet above sea level. For decades, researchers dismissed it. Geologists called it a natural fold in the Earth's crust, a trick of erosion, nothing more. Then a research team decided to look beneath the surface. They brought ground-penetrating radar, technology that sends signals through soil and rock, and maps what lies beneath. They expected layers of compressed earth, standard geology. What came back on the screen stopped the survey in its tracks. Beneath the formation was a hollow space, not a cave, not a crack in the rock, a structure. The internal layout showed organized spacing, parallel walls, consistent measurements running the entire length of the formation. One of the engineers on the team pulled up Genesis 6:15 on his phone. The dimensions described there, length, width, and depth, matched what the radar was showing beneath their feet. Not approximately, not roughly, closely enough that the lead engineer set down his equipment and didn't speak for several minutes. The team had come looking for geological data. What they found instead was the beginning of something none of them were prepared for. Because the structure wasn't just old. It wasn't just large. Parts of it were still responding to their instruments. The radar sweeps continued over the following days, and with each pass, the picture became harder to explain. The internal walls weren't random, they were evenly spaced. The kind of precision that takes planning, not pressure and time. Natural rock formations crack and shift. They compress unevenly. They don't produce consistent corridors. They did. A senior engineer on the team was quoted saying 2 words after reviewing the imaging data. This is design. That was the moment the mood changed. But the structural anomalies were only the beginning. When soil samples were collected from the site and sent to Istanbul Technical University for analysis, the results raised an entirely separate set of questions. The samples contained marine materials, remnants associated with sea environments, the kind of organic traces you find near coastlines, not on a mountainside in eastern Turkey. Dating placed some of that material as far back as 5000 BC. That timeline matters, because many researchers who study ancient flood narratives place a major global flood event at approximately the same period. The team filed their preliminary findings quietly. No announcements, no press releases. Then the thermal imaging results came in. Inside one specific area of the structure, a sealed section, slightly separated from the main corridors, the thermal scan detected a heat signature. Faint, but stable. They ran the scan again. Same location, same reading. A structure buried for thousands of years should register no thermal variation. The temperature inside should match the surrounding rock, cold and uniform. This wasn't. No one on the team had an explanation. And rather than report the anomaly upward through official channels, they made a decision that would change everything. They decided to go deeper. A small access point was carefully drilled into the outer layer of the formation. The team inserted a micro-bore camera, a thin probe designed to navigate tight spaces and transmit live footage back to a monitor. The probe went in easily, too easily, as though the path had already been prepared. The first images showed walls coated in a thick, dark substance. Samples were collected and later identified as pitch, a natural sealant described in Genesis 6:14 as the material God instructed Noah to coat the ark with inside and out. But under closer examination, this pitch wasn't ordinary. It contained crystalline particles arranged in patterns that didn't occur naturally, and embedded within it were traces of ash. One team member familiar with ancient Hebrew pointed out that the original word used in Genesis for pitch, kopher, doesn't just mean sealant. It carries a secondary meaning: to cover, to contain, to protect something from getting out. The room shifted, because up to that point, everyone had been thinking about the ark as something built to keep things safe inside. Now they were considering a different possibility. What if parts of it were built to keep something in? The camera continued moving through the passage. Then the instruments reacted. Radiation levels began climbing, slowly at first, then steadily. No external source could account for it. The surrounding rock showed no radioactive properties. The equipment was checked and rechecked. The readings didn't stop. Then came the pressure data. The sensors detected fluctuations in the air pressure inside the passage. Not random spikes, not equipment interference. A rhythm, consistent, measured, repeating at regular intervals. The lead researcher stared at the data for a long time before speaking. "That pattern," he said quietly, "looks biological." Nobody laughed. The camera pushed deeper into the passage. The walls narrowed. The coating of pitch became thicker. And then, in the upper corners of the tunnel, something else appeared. Marks. At first, they looked like stress fractures, natural damage from centuries of pressure. But when the camera light hit them directly, the pattern became clear. These weren't fractures, they were claw marks. Deep, repeated, carved into the surface with force. The team studied the angle and direction of each mark carefully. They weren't made from the outside going in. They came from inside. Something had been trying to get out. Further along the passage, the camera picked up another set of markings. These were different, more deliberate, arranged in rows along the lower section of the wall. The team's linguist began documenting them frame by frame. After several hours of analysis and digital enhancement, a partial translation emerged. The symbols didn't match any single known language perfectly, but they shared strong similarities with early Proto-Semitic script, one of the oldest writing systems ever identified. 3 phrases came through clearly: bind the corrupted, seal them for the fire, do not open until the day of judgment. These were not records. They were not historical observations. They were instructions. And whoever left them wasn't describing something that had already happened. They were warning whoever came next. The team sat with that translation for a long time, because the implication was unavoidable. This structure wasn't just built to preserve life through a flood. It was built to contain something that was never supposed to be released. And at the far end of the passage, just visible at the edge of the camera's range, was a door. Layered, reinforced, sealed, and covered on its surface with impact marks that came from the same direction as the claw marks. From the inside, the door was unlike anything else in the structure. The rest of the formation had aged the way ancient materials do: worn, compressed, darkened by time. But this door looked different. The wood beneath the pitch coating was still dense. The metal reinforcement plates were warped, not from decay, but from heat, extreme heat, applied from one direction, the inside. There was no visible source for that kind of temperature. No volcanic activity in the immediate area. No evidence of fire damage on the outer walls of the passage. Whatever produced that heat was behind the door. One team member quietly referenced Genesis 7:16, and the Lord shut him in. The verse had always been interpreted as God sealing Noah safely inside the ark before the flood came. But standing in that passage, looking at a door that had been struck repeatedly from the other side and scorched from within, the words carried a different weight. Maybe the sealing wasn't only about protection. Maybe something else had been locked inside. Deliberately, permanently, the team conducted one final scan before the situation was taken out of their hands. The results showed movement behind the door. Not geological shifting, not settling rock. A shape, slow, but present, moving toward the interior wall. Within minutes of that final scan being processed, orders came through. Shut it down. Clear the site. Take nothing with you. The data was confiscated. The site was sealed. The team was escorted out and told not to discuss what they had seen. Just like that, it was gone. But the question that followed every one of them home was the same. If something was sealed inside that structure 4,000 years ago, what exactly was it? To understand what may have been locked inside that mountain, you have to go back to the text that describes why the flood happened in the first place. Genesis 6 doesn't begin with rain, it begins with corruption. It describes beings referred to as the Nephilim, the offspring of unions between what the text calls the sons of God and human women. The result was a generation of beings described as mighty, violent, and fundamentally outside the boundaries of what God had created. The corruption spread. Genesis 6:5 describes a world where the thoughts of humanity had become continuously and entirely destructive. God's response was the flood, but Noah was chosen for a specific reason. Genesis 6:9 describes him as blameless in his generations. Many scholars interpret that phrase not just as moral integrity, but as genetic and spiritual purity. His lineage had not been corrupted. The ark didn't save everyone. It couldn't. The Nephilim were excluded. What the flood was designed to do, among other things, was remove what had been corrupted from the earth. But here is the detail that changes the question entirely. Numbers 13:33 records that after the flood, the Israelite scouts entering Canaan reported seeing the Nephilim again. If the flood eliminated them, how were they still there? One interpretation is that traces of that corrupted lineage survived, carried through human bloodlines into the generations that followed. Another interpretation is darker, that not all of them were destroyed by water, that some were contained, bound, sealed, put somewhere they could not escape from. And if the warnings carved into those tunnel walls were instructions left by someone who knew exactly what they were doing, then the structure in Turkey wasn't just an ark, it was a prison. The story in Genesis is not the only account of a world-ending flood. Across cultures separated by oceans and centuries, the same core narrative appears. The Atrahasis epic, one of the oldest written records ever found, describes a catastrophic flood sent to reset a world overrun by noise, violence, and rebellion. A chosen man is warned in advance. He builds a vessel. He survives. The rest do not. In ancient Hawaii, a figure named Nu builds a large canoe before a devastating flood and comes to rest on a mountain. In Mesopotamia, the Epic of Gilgamesh contains a flood narrative so structurally similar to Genesis that scholars have debated for over a century which account came first. What makes this significant is not just the survival story, it's what these accounts agree was destroyed. Almost universally, ancient flood narratives describe the pre-flood world as one populated by beings that were more than human. Giants, hybrids, entities that existed between the physical and something else entirely. The flood didn't just reset the landscape, it removed something specific. And in multiple traditions, the question of where those beings went, whether they were fully destroyed or merely displaced, is left deliberately unanswered. Archaeology has added its own layer to this. Reports of oversized skeletal remains have emerged from burial sites across the American Midwest, the Middle East, and Sardinia. Bones that don't match standard human proportions. Many of these findings were documented in 19th century records and then quietly disappeared from public access. The pattern across cultures, texts, and physical findings points in one direction. Something was here before the flood that shouldn't have been. And the flood was at least partly designed to deal with it. Jesus made a specific comparison in Matthew 24:37. He didn't say the last days would be like a time of war, or plague, or natural disaster. He said they would be like the days of Noah. That comparison is precise, and it points to something specific about what made that period different from any other in human history. It wasn't just violence. Violence has existed in every era. It was the nature of what was driving the violence. The corruption wasn't just behavioral. According to the text, it was something deeper, a distortion of what humanity was created to be. Look at the present moment. Genetic research is now capable of editing the base code of living organisms. AI systems are being developed that can generate human faces, human voices, human writing, indistinguishable from the real thing. The boundaries between what is created and what is manufactured are dissolving faster than most people realize. These are not political observations. They are technical facts, and they echo something. The book of Revelation describes a period of deception so complete that even those paying close attention will struggle to distinguish truth from imitation. Revelation 13:14 describes signs and wonders used to deceive entire nations. That capacity now exists. In 1948, Israel was re-established as a nation an event described in prophetic literature as a marker of the final generation. The generation that witnesses that restoration, according to Matthew 24, would also witness the events that follow it. That generation is alive right now. The convergence of these threads, the site in Turkey, the ancient warnings, the global flood accounts, the present technological moment, doesn't demand a single conclusion. But it does demand a question. If the days of Noah are returning, and something was sealed away the last time, what happens when the seal breaks? The site at Durupanar remains closed. No official explanation has been given for the shutdown. No findings from the research team have been formally published. The data collected during those final scans, including the thermal readings, the pressure rhythms, and the image of movement behind the sealed door, has not been made public. That silence is its own kind of answer, because in the history of archaeological discovery, sites get shut down for two reasons. Nothing was found, or something was found that changes too much. The research team didn't walk away with nothing. They walked away with evidence of a structure that matches ancient text, contains warnings in a language that predates most known writing systems, and produced biological readings from behind a door that has been sealed for thousands of years. And they were told to forget it. Here is what remains. The inscription on the tunnel wall said, "Do not open until the day of judgment." It didn't say if. It said until. Whoever carved those words wasn't sealing something away forever. They were setting a timer, a condition, a moment when whatever is behind that door would no longer need to stay there. Every ancient flood tradition describes the pre-flood world as a place that had crossed a line, a threshold that once passed, couldn't be walked back. Most researchers who study those texts agree on one thing. The world crossed that line once before. The question being asked quietly in certain academic and theological circles right now is not whether the seal in Turkey still holds. The question is whether we are approaching the condition under which it was always meant to be opened. And nobody who has seen the data is saying no.